All right, guys, we made it through Genesis. There is an entire book of the Bible. If you started with me and have made it this far, we did it. We have finished an entire book of the Bible, and we're going to take a few minutes and have a praise party, but that's in another video. Right now, I'm going to supply you with a recap to make sure that you got it all. Trust me, this is not an exhaustive list. It's very, very short. I'm not hitting everything, but I want you to know where to find it so that you can look it back up. You know which videos to take a look at. So, first off, we are going to applaud yourself. Like, take a second. I was going to zoom past that, but let's take a second and really celebrate the fact that I don't know if you didn't ever read the entire book of Genesis. I don't know if you've never considered reading the Bible. I don't know if you read it 100 times, but the reality is you read it. And so you are this much closer to understanding God. You are this much closer to a closer walk with God. You are this much closer to finishing the Bible, because that is the goal, is to read it and reread it and reread it again. And so I want to commend you for doing everything that you've done so far. And thank you for coming along with me. And I hope that I've helped you. What I want us to do, know, and all of those things is let me know if this works. Let me know if you need any other information. Let me know if there's something I can help you with that is going to be different. If you need more, if you need less, if I'm going too fast, here's your space. Throw it in the comments on this video and let me know so that I can make sure that when we go into our next book, Exodus, because we got to keep going. We got to know what happens to the Israelites in the end. Like, we have to figure this out. So we're going to have to read this next book, and I want to know what else I can do to help you. Like, this is a tutoring situation, so let's get to doing it. So what I'm going to attempt to do is cover 25 chapters in 25 minutes. So it's going to be about 30 minutes. You know, sometimes that happens. But let's go. So Genesis, first book of the Bible. We're going to just recap the first 25 chapters here. The next video, we're going to recap the 26th through the 50th chapters as a recap, just so you can know where stuff is. Not really giving a lot of info. Chapter 1 covers creation. 6 days of creation. 7th day God rested. God created light on day 1. He created light and darkness. He separated it and made day 1. Sun was not created until day 2. The moon was not created until day 2. God ain't need that. You don't really need that. That's literally just for us to know it's daytime, get out of bed, go to work. So remember, it is 6 days of creation. On the 7th day, God took a rest. He built our bodies to need a rest. He designed it for us to have a rest. Take your breaks. Chapter 2, God created, he talked about it first in chapter 1, and he actually tells us what he did in chapter 2. He created man in the Garden of Eden. He put the two together, and God spent some time with his friends in the garden. And so he had this man in the garden, and his job was to kind of care for, take care of, tend this garden, take care of the animals that were there. And so God is like, you know what? You need somebody to be with you. You need some help. And he causes man to go into a deep sleep. And from his side, he is able to pull what he needs to create a woman who stands beside him and partners with him on things. And so that is how we ended up with the man and the woman in the garden. Not people in general, the man and the woman in the garden. So in chapter 3 is where temptation happens, the fall happens, and the curse is brought in. So the fall is when they eat from the forbidden tree, which is one of the 2 trees. There's a tree of life and there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They are tempted by the serpent. When they eat, their eyes are opened, and God asks them what happened, and they get to telling on everybody, and so everybody get in trouble. There is a curse for everyone. My interpretation of this curse is a little different from what most people have probably taught, so go check it out. What ends up happening is everybody gets in trouble and they all get kicked out. So they are banished from the garden, and just for their own protection. In chapter 4, the man and the woman, they get to know each other for real, and they have a couple of kids. And so their first 2 sons bring a sacrifice to God, and God doesn't like the sacrifice of Cain. He accepts the sacrifice from Abel, and Cain gets mad. God warns him first. And what he does is not heed God's warning, is what a lot of people do. And he let his anger walk him into something that ended up ruining his life and the lives of those who were connected to him. And so he has some descendants who follow in his foolishness, and they see a very similar end. In chapter 5, they show the lifespans and the descendants that go from the man in the garden, or Adam, as we know him, to Noah. So we get to see this bloodline, or this family tree effectively. And then it tells us that Noah was born and he has sons, and he has 3 sons. These 3 sons have wives. In chapter 6, we meet the Nephilim. We meet the Nephilim, and we see the Nephilim destroyed kind of in Genesis, real close together. So I'm not really, I don't believe that they're still walking the earth, because I don't think God plays games and makes mistakes about getting rid of something when he gets rid of something. So we see that the Nephilim are basically the children of these fallen angels and women on earth, and it doesn't end up well. The earth begins to spiral into foolishness and chaos. Evil is in the hearts of every man. Even the animals are not clean at this point. And so God says, I'm going to get rid of absolutely everything on here, but my servant Noah has been righteous. And for that, I will save Noah and his family. So it is important that even if you're the only person in your family that's going to live right, do it, because you don't know what God is saving you from. So he gives Noah the specs for the ark, and Noah builds it. God sends animals 2 by 2, or 2 of every kind, so male and female of each kind of animal, just takes itself to the ark, because God has determined these are the ones that I'm going to save so we can continue the species. And there are certain animals that come 7 by 7, and we see that in chapter 7. That clean animals come 7. They come in groups of 7s, so that there are animals available for food, there's animals available for sacrifice, and still animals left over, so that they could go out and replenish the earth when it's time. And so in chapter 7, we also see that it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and that water comes down from the sky and up from the earth. So after 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and the total amount of time that they spent waiting on the ark, it is about a year. Go read it. It is about a year that they spend on this ark waiting for the ground to be dry. And in chapter 8, the ground is dry. They are able to leave the ark. God gives them permission to go, because when he closes the door is closed until he opens it. When he opens that door back up, they are able to leave. And the first thing that Noah does is build an altar, and he worships. Lord, you saved us. And I thank you. You're awesome. That door you held closed, ain't let no water get in here. God, this is amazing. And he worships God for the salvation of his family. In chapter 9, God reiterates and gives covenants to Noah. Here is when we start to see the beginning of the Abrahamic blessing. We begin to see the promises of things that are going to come through his bloodline. And that God promises that he will not destroy the earth again by water. He said, I ain't going to keep tearing my earth up because y'all won't act right. And trees was obedient. Nature was obedient, even when you weren't. And so he puts a rainbow in the sky as a reminder. When God sees the rainbow, he will remember to pull back and don't let the earth be covered by water. It is a reminder to him not to kill us for our sins. The rainbow is a reminder to God not to kill us for our sins. And so please, when you see that rainbow, just do me a favor and ask for forgiveness. If everybody repented every time they saw a rainbow, God would we would move the hearts. We would move the heart of God. Like we literally would the unified amount of people who are seeking repentance at a point where God is like, ooh, don't do it. So, we're going to head into, we're going to stay in now real quick. So there is a situation where Noah gets drunk. A lot of times we see people say, Noah was a drunk. No, he wasn't. Noah was not a drunk. He got drunk. One mistake does not change your life or define who you are. So we're not going to allow this one mistake to define who Noah is. Noah was a righteous man of God. And so he has a situation where he get himself a little too foolish with the drink, and his son embarrasses him. And when his son embarrasses him, that son's legacy is cursed. So in chapter 10, the bloodline of Noah is shown. So we get to see the breakdown of who his sons are father to. And we get to see kind of this next step down through some generations to get to where we are now, where there's the Tower of Babel. Meaning we now have a whole populated earth again. There is a space where people are all together. And with the Tower of Babel, everybody's gotten together and they're going to build this tower to heaven and they're going to go meet God. And God was like, foolishness. And he confuses their languages. And everybody kind of groups themselves off based off of the language, the people they could still understand. And they move away into different areas. And so languages get spread across the world. And then we get to see, again, a bloodline. And we get to see where Abram is introduced. And Abram is eventually going to be Father Abraham. So we get to meet Abram here. And then in chapter 12, we see where God calls Abram out and was like, Abram, I want you to come with me. I want you to walk. Get your wife, get your people, and I want you to leave. And when you leave, I'll tell you where you're going when you get there. I'll let you know where you're going when you get there. And so he packs his wife up and they go. And what happened? He takes his nephew Lot with him. Nephew Lot. Lot is the son of his brother who is deceased. And so he takes Lot with him. They go on out. And the first thing they do is when they run into some issues, they get to Egypt. And he understands that you cannot marry, you can't marry a married woman, but you can marry a widow. So he's in fear for his life. Even though he is walking where God told him to, he's in fear for his life. And he lies for the first time and says, she's my sister, not my wife. And they take her. And of course, there are plagues that fall on this city because of the blessing that's on Abraham, the calling that's on Abraham, causes foolishness to happen when he step out of it. We step out of line. And so they get ejected. They was like, get your stuff and get out of here. Don't play no games with us and with your wife no more. And so as they're traveling away from that space, the wealth, the possessions that they have become so much that it's taxing on the land for both Lot and all of his possessions and Abram and his possessions to exist in the same space. So they separate. Lot chooses Sodom. And in 14, Sodom is captured and Lot is captured as part of that. There's a war between all these kings and Lot is captured as kind of spoils of the war. And so Abram was like, nah, my nephew. And so he goes and gathers some men that go in, they wreak havoc, cut everybody down, get Lot back. And so after he get him back, he was like, they're rewarded for this rescue. And he was like, nah, don't give me nothing because I don't want you to say you made me. God did this, so you keep everything you got. And so in chapter 15, we are getting there, guys. Chapter 15, God gives Abram a vision. And he reaffirms his promise. So God said, hey, if you leave, I'm gonna give you some land, I'm gonna give you some descendants. And at this time, he has a wife who was unable to have children. And so in chapter 15, God reaffirms the promise and says, yeah, it's not going to be a servant. It's not going to come the way you think it is. You're going to actually have a child. And so when he steps out on that, God reaffirms it and says, look, I know I told you that you were going to have descendants, and it's not going to be this servant that you think it's going to be. You're going to have a child. He reaffirms this promise, and he gives him a foretelling or prophecy of 400 years of slavery, 400 years of captivity for his descendants. But he promises them before it even happens, I'm going to bring them out. I don't want you to worry. I'm letting you know this here, but they're going to come out and they're going to be victorious. There's going to be a time where it's a time for this. It's a season for this. They're going to be okay. And so in chapter 16, Sarah gives Hagar to Abram to be his wife because God has given another piece to this puzzle. You're going to have a child. Maybe they thought it was a servant. You're going to have descendants. They thought it was coming a different way. But it says after this last vision, God says, nope, it's going to be a baby. It's a baby that comes from you. So Sarah was like, well, clearly I'm the problem. And so she gives him Hagar, her servant, as like a handmaid situation to be a wife. She elevates her level. And so after she becomes pregnant, Sarah is in her feelings. She don't like this and she mistreats her. And so she runs away. And when she runs away, she gets to have an encounter. Hagar gets to have an encounter with God, which is really interesting because Hagar is Egyptian and was not raised to know God, worship God, believe in God, none of that stuff. She got secondhand God from being around Abram and Sarai. And so while she has run away, there is a promise that her son is going to be named Ishmael, and that there is a promise, and she recognizes and sees that God can see her. She has an understanding and an encounter with God. In chapter 17, at 99 years old, God gives Abram the other piece of the puzzle. So he has been wandering for years at this point. Years. He has been promising him a child, and he is now 99 years old. So I'm certain he's like, hey, friend. All right, God, you didn't say it's going to happen. I trusted you on at this point. I done gave up on it because neither one of me or my wife can do this. And so he promises him descendants that will be kings and great nations. He promises him the land of Canaan. All this land that you've been walking on is going to be yours. You're over here writing the borders with your footsteps. And he changes his name. He becomes Abraham, and Sarai becomes Sarah. And Ishmael is blessed, but God points out that this is not the son of the promise. That there's going to be a son that comes between you and Sarah. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm God. I'm going to do this thing. And so he says, I want you as a sign of this covenant that you believe, that you agree. I want you to circumcise every male. Don't matter who it is. I want you to circumcise them. So everybody lined up that was male and got circumcised from 0 to 1,000. Everybody got circumcised. And so in chapter 18, Abraham is sitting outside and sees 3 men approaching. So he stops him and is like, hey, you got to rest here, have something to eat, little hospitality, and they sit and talk. And so while they're preparing this food, they say, oh, where's your wife? She's going to have a baby in a year. This time next year, she's going to have a baby. And Sarah hears it and was like, and laughs and was like, I don't know. So this is where Sarah laughs in chapter 18. And so they promise that they're going to come back and she's going to have a baby. And while they're there, they go to leave and they're moving towards Sodom and Gomorrah, these cities that are next to each other. And Abraham knows that Lot is over there. He knows that they're evil. He knows what's going on over there. And so he asks what y'all going to do. And they're like, oh, no. We're just going to see if the city is really as bad as it seems. The prayers that are being prayed are reaching God's ears. Is this really what it is? We're going to give them an opportunity to get this thing right. And Abraham was like, well, wait a minute now. Will you destroy the whole city if there are 50 righteous people? And he gets to haggling. He go 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. He said, well, will you save one, basically? And so that is where that conversation is. Chapter 19 is where Sodom and Gomorrah kind of seal their fate. And we see at that point that the 2 angels visit the city. Lot takes them in and tries to protect them from everything that's going on in this city, and is unable to protect them. The angels, in fact, have to protect him. And so they are instructed to leave the city. He goes to his sons-in-law, the men that are promised to marry his daughters. Like, they are effectively part of the family, and they laugh at him. And so they get whisked out of there, and Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. In chapter 19, it is destroyed. And at the end of chapter 19, his daughters get him drunk. He is still a righteous man. He is still somebody who, at this point, it has the ear of God and can pray and talk to God and has a relationship with him. But somebody else made some decisions and they got him drunk and they become pregnant by him. And they have each of them has a son. So there are 2 boys that are born. And these sons create a legacy of people who find themselves at odds with God or at odds with the people of God. In chapter 20, Abraham lies again. He gets close to this. He gets close to a city and sends Sarah in as his sister and not his wife. And she is taken again. And Abimelech is the king at this point. And God sends him a dream and was like, don't touch that man's wife. And so he understands who she is at that point and releases them. But he fusses at Abraham about lying. Because that ain't what we doing here. You could have messed us up for real and I'd have been in trouble because of your lie. Don't do that to me. And so he sent him on out and let him go. In 21, it is about a year later, and Sarah, in fact, has that baby. They named him Isaac, and Abraham is 100. Sarah is 90 years old. God did a whole thing right there. This is where there is proof that it doesn't matter what your situation is. It doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter the time frame. It doesn't matter any of those things. What God says matters. And so Sarah has her son. She raises him to a point where he is weaned. And this is where Hagar is asked to leave, where Hagar actually leaves with her son Ishmael. They have a wilderness experience or a desert experience in this situation, and she feels like they're gonna die. And God hears the prayers of her son. Make sure you teach your kids to pray. You don't know what they're gonna save you from. She hears the prayers of her. God hears the prayers of her son and saves them and gives her her own promise of a nation and brings them to a place where they actually walk into this promise. In chapter 22, Abraham is told to sacrifice his son Isaac. He spends some time wrapping his mind around it, but his obedience to God makes him pack this baby up and take him up the mountain and prepare him for to be a sacrifice. And this is where you get the ram in the bush story. If you ever heard somebody say, and it was a ram in the bush, this is where a ram in the bush comes from, is that they get up to do the sacrifice. And as he, in his heart, purposes to follow what God says, not that he ever hurt this boy, but when he purposed in his heart to do it, that's when God said, hey, it's a ram over here. Use that ram as a sacrifice. I just wanted to see if you can do it. I feel like that test was in place to see if man would be willing to give back the promise, give back their own child, because God was going to do the same thing when Jesus came. So, chapter 23, we say goodbye to Sarah. And so there is a whole passage on how we get this field where there's this cave where they create this tomb. This is the tomb that Abraham and Sarah are buried in, Isaac and Rebekah and their son Jacob and his wife Leah. These are the men who carry the promise and their wives who help them carry it. This is the burial place for them. It's purchased. It is the first piece of land that Abraham owns through this whole wilderness journey. He owns nothing. He lives like a nomad. He lives wandering the entire time, and he has now purchased something that is owned and is theirs. In chapter 24, after Sarah dies, there is a servant that is sent to go find his wife Rebekah. There are special instructions that he's given. There's a special prayer that he prays. There is a special conversation that he has that constantly confirms what he asked God to give him. And this man who is not a religious, somebody who would trust or believe or know or worship God by birth, shows that if you pray and you accept that God is for you. It doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter what you were raised in. You are able to go to God and find God and work with God and have a relationship with God and be able to ask him and seek and get access to everything he promises in the Bible. All you need is your obedience and your submission to God. In chapter 25, this is after the servant has returned with a wife for Isaac, that Abraham dies. And we start to pick up from Isaac, his son. We start to pick up Isaac's story, and Isaac now carries the Abrahamic blessing, and that is where we stop for right now. The next video, of course, will pick up on chapter 25 and work our way through the 50th chapter of Genesis, just as a quick recap so you know where to find things. So again, if there's anything that you feel like you need from this, you feel like we can have a little bit more of, a little bit less of, I will take your comments. If you have questions about Genesis, in any part of Genesis, give me your questions and we'll address them. Like, let's make sure that we're all learning this so that when we move into Exodus, we got it. Okay? So again, congratulations on reading the first book of the Bible. I pray that this helped you, and I'll see you in the next one.